This is TWiT.
I titled this Not So Wyze. 1 week ago, last Tuesday, Bitdefender published the results of their close examination of the very popular Wyze family of security and surveillance-oriented internet-connected webcams. And it will surprise no one to learn that they found problems, nor that the problems were extremely critical given the application these webcams are typically deployed for, right? I mean, they're being sold as, let's use this for security. And as I said at the top of the show, I utterly love the details, and our listeners will too, and you will, Leo, of the authentication bypass that Bitdefender found, which I'll describe in a minute. The most distressing part of the story, well, the equally distressing part of the story, is the fact that the Bitdefender group has been working with Wyze, or perhaps better stated, attempting to work with Wyze for 3 years to get these 3 critical problems which they uncovered resolved. Back on March 6th of 2019, Bitdefender made first contact with Wyze and asked for a PGP key via their support form. And as we know, that's standard practice now. You ask a vendor for a PGP key, which will allow you to securely communicate with them, which involves the disclosure of potentially extremely sensitive details that they don't want exposed any more than the discoverer wants them exposed. No response. Oh, they waited a week on March 15th, 2019, 3 years ago. Bitdefender, a little more now, Bitdefender made a second attempt at getting in touch with the vendor. Still no response. Apparently unrelated, on April 22nd, Wyze released an update for WyzeCam version 2 to version 4.9.4.37, which reduced the risk for unauthenticated access to the contents of the SD card that the camera might have, but still no contact with Bitdefender's research team. So this looks like it was just coincidental. The next day, 4.10.3.50 was released for WyzeCam Pan 1, version 1 with the same risk reduction for unauthenticated access to the contents of the SD card. So that looked like, they did the same firmware update to a different product. That was April 23rd. A month goes by, and Bitdefender thinks, well, okay, let's reserve some CVE numbers for what we will eventually be publishing. So they did that. So that's May. June, July, August, September, 4 months. And Wyze released WyzeCam version 2 that happened to fix one of the 3 CVEs that had been issued, but not the most critical one. September, October, so that was September 24th, 2019. Now we move to November 9th, 2020. And the vendor fixed a different one of the CVEs through an app update. The next day, finally, Wyze acknowledges the reception from a year and a half before and assigns an internal contact at Wyze to deal with Bitdefender. 2 days later, Bitdefender sends the advisory to them and a proof of concept. 9 months pass. Silence. On August 31st, 2021, Bitdefender follows up on patch progress. Hello, is anybody there? September 13th, 2021. So 2 weeks from August 31st to September 13th. Bitdefender notifies the defender, it actually probably was exactly 2 weeks. They waited, nothing happened. So they said, okay, we're going to publish. 4.5 months pass, which brings us to January 29th, 2022. Wyze released firmware to fix the unauthenticated access to the contents of the SD card issue, which is one of the biggest problems. Okay, so that was on January 29th. Being, again, like ridiculously responsible, Bitdefender waited 60 days from January 29th to March 29th. On March 29th, they published their report. I've said it before, and I'm sure this won't be the last time I say it again. There is something fundamentally wrong with the idea, the way we have everything set up today, that an independent security research group must expend this level of effort to not only first reverse engineer and examine a product whose security is critically important to its users, but to then face an utterly unresponsive product publisher and attempt for 3 years to get them to fix critical flaws in the operation of their surveillance interconnected webcams. And look at the catch-22 that Bitdefender is then in. The only way to leverage responsibility from Wyze, to get Wyze to get off the dime, would be to go public with the news and the details of the flaws. But doing so would immediately place all of Wyze's gazillion webcam users at significant risk. And even if details were withheld, from a partial disclosure by Bitdefender, we've all seen many instances where just telling the bad guys where to look for vulnerabilities is all that's necessary. Those wearing black hats could certainly follow in Bitdefender's footsteps. So Bitdefender had little true choice other than to wait and push and poke and prod and hope that Wyze would eventually open a responsible dialogue. Again, they couldn't risk drawing any attention to the Wyze cams because other people could figure out how to exploit them. And the problems were really bad. And what I loved is it just rich that Wyze's cybersecurity team, like they have one, finally said they appreciated the responsible disclosure provided by Bitdefender on the vulnerabilities. Yeah, I bet they did. 3 years Bitdefender patiently waited because of Bitdefender's ethics. You know, essentially Wyze had Bitdefender over a barrel. Okay. Oh, so get a load of this truly amazing classic remote connection authentication bypass. It's just the best thing ever. When connecting remotely, a client is required to log on to the camera, right? The camera running a service, so we'll consider it to be the server, the client being a user on a web page or whatever. A client is required to log on to the device, of course, because you don't want everyone to have access to your webcam by definition. The client and the webcam share a 128-bit secret key. Okay, that's good security. Webcam has a 128-bit secret key burned into it. The client is required to know it. A pre-shared key. Good security. No problem there. So the client initiates its connection by sending an IOCTL, IO control command with the ID of its hex 2710. Upon receiving the cam will accept a TCP connection. Then the Wyze cam receives this packet with the ID 2710, which induces it to generate a random nonce value, which it encrypts with its 128-bit shared secret key. Okay, that's great. It sends the encrypted blob to the client. By the design of this simple protocol, the client must have that same 128-bit shared secret key, which it uses to decrypt the camera's randomly chosen nonce value, which it had then encrypted, to authenticate itself to the camera, which it does by returning the properly decrypted camera nonce using an IOCTL command with the ID 2712 instead of 2710. So 2710 initiates the handshake, asks the camera to generate a nonce, which it encrypts this 128-bit shared secret, sends the encrypted blob back to the client. Client that has the same 128-bit shared secret key decrypts it and then returns it to the camera with the under the command 2712. The camera, receiving the 2712 IOCTL, compares the nonce that was hopefully decrypted by the connecting client to the value that it stored locally, and only if they match will the authentication succeed and the connection be accepted. And after that, the client is free to do whatever it wishes with the camera. Right? No problem. Simple, shared secret, workable protocol. Here's what the Bitdefender guys found. The way the Wyze firmware works is that upon receiving that initial 2710 command, it generates and stores the nonce for subsequent comparison. And it then encrypts it and sends it to the client. But if the client never sends the 2710 command in the first place, the nonce's value stored in RAM remains set to all zeros. I just love this. So all any attacker needs to do to gain full access to any original or only just, patched just earlier last month, or any unpatched cam, is to connect and skip issuing the first 2710 command, which asks the camera to begin the authentication handshake. Instead, an attacker simply first sends the second 2712 command with an all zeros authentication. Since that will always match the camera's default null nonce, anyone can log into anyone's Wyze cam. You can see why Bitdefender said, holy crap, 3 years ago.
Anyone.
But
you do have to have physical access. You have to be on the Wi-Fi, right? You can't do this from the internet. Or can you?
No. It is a network attack.
Okay.
So the camera needs to be exposed. You have to be able to connect to the camera.
Right.
So if it's behind a NAT router, you wouldn't be able to. But if there was some reason that somebody had put their Wyze cam on the internet, then anybody can access it.
Wow. Okay.
Bitdefender wrote, after authentication, we can fully control the device, including motion control, pan and tilt, disabling recording to SD, turning the camera on or off, among other things. We cannot view the live audio and video feed, though. Get this, because it is encrypted under that same, still unknown to a remote attacker, shared private key. However, they wrote, we can bypass this restriction by daisy chaining a stack buffer overflow, which leads to remote code execution as detailed in Part 2. They said, for the stack buffer overflow, when processing IOCTL with ID 2776, the device does not check whether you're not going to believe this, Leo, whether the destination buffer is long enough before copying the contents onto the stack.
Well, there you go.
Exploiting this vulnerability is straightforward. Through the IOCTL with ID 2776, we can set which servers to use to connect to the cloud. This seems to be a debugging function that allows the selection of production, beta, or internal API servers. When sending a request, we specify the length of the buffer in the first byte, then the buffer itself. They said this content is then copied onto the stack into a fixed 40 hex, which is 64 byte length buffer. Even though the specified size in the first byte is taken as a signed int. Okay, now a signed int that is a byte will have a maximum size of 7F, because the signed bit that we were talking about a few weeks ago, that's got to be off for the signed int to have a positive value. Still, 7F is 127, so that's enough to overwrite a 64-byte buffer and allow the stack to be overwritten and run the attacker-provided code. The third and final flaw they found is unauthenticated access to the contents of the SD card. When inserting an SD card into the camera, they said the contents of the SD card, including the recordings, can be accessed via the web server listing on port 80 without authentication. This is enabled by the fact that after an SD card is inserted, a symlink to the card mount directory is automatically created in the www directory, which is served by the web server. The card contents can be viewed through the hello.cgi functionality located at /cgi-bin/hello.cgi. Then the files can be downloaded through the /sdpath/path. The SD card also holds the camera's log files. Before writing them to the card, the device XORs the content with a hex 90. Like, why? Not very strong protection. These log files can contain sensitive info such as the unique ID and the shared private key, which can then be used to connect remotely and view the stream in real time, because now we're able to decrypt the stream having obtained the shared private key. The good news here, such as it is, and it's not much, is that the second and third generation Wyze cams can be updated to cure these various problems. The bad news is that the first generation cameras have been abandoned by Wyze, and Wyze has said that they do not plan to support or update them in the future. The only thing we can hope for anyone who has early first-gen Wyze cameras is that maybe the press that this is now finally, after 3 years generating, with the negative publicity of having critically broken and trivial to hack first-generation webcams, might cause Wyze to change their minds. Unless it's burned into actual ROM, there is no reason, or maybe they didn't provide a means for updating the firmware. I can't explain. They say there's not enough RAM to update the firmware, not enough memory. That seems hard to believe. Yeah, it does. It seems more likely that they're just like, well, those are too old. Yeah, and they were only $20, right? I mean. Yeah, it was an amazing little camera for the price. Right. But, Wyze, and this is what we see, right? With bottom-of-the-barrel IoT vendors that just want to sell their stuff and not be bothered with security. Unfortunately, they tried to have it secure, but nobody audited their stuff, right? It's all proprietary. It's just trust us. We got this. It's 128-bit encryption, military grade. Can't get in there. Yes, just drop the first half of the handshake and do the latter half, and handshake with all zeros, and you're in. Wow.